Aaron, I'm a big fan of your work. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Is this the first time that I'm on your show?
Yeah, actually,
I
I was
think
just
so,
thinking about
right?
that. It is the first time you're on my show because now, just for listeners, we did a Sailor Academy live stream, and I hosted Aaron as part of that. But actually, this is the first time I've got Aaron on my show, so that's it's great to be with you. And for listeners who are new, Aaron is one of the legendary Bitcoin journalists. So definitely, he's written a lot of excellent articles, and he's also a podcast host himself. So you guys make sure you go and check out Aaron's podcast. But the reason I wanted to chat with Aaron today is he's on the ground. So, Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what your experience has been, just broadly?
Yeah, so I'm in San Salvador right now, which is the capital of El Salvador. I've been in El Salvador since early July. Small intermezzo. I was in Nashville in the meantime at the Bitcoin Magazine offices for a couple of days and in Mexico, but I've been there for well over 2 months now, just to see how the whole Bitcoin law was being rolled out and how it would be accepted, and just keep a pulse on everything going on over here. I'm still here, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd love to chat a little bit and see what your perspective is. Obviously, you're on the ground because there were differing views, right? Obviously, amongst us Bitcoiners, we were mostly supportive, although I would say in fairness, if we were being principled, we should be against Article 7 of the Bitcoin law, which mandates that a person must accept Bitcoin, right? And so I think, I mean, my view on this is it's an imperfect step forward, right? Because the mere fact that they are taking away capital gains on Bitcoin and enabling and supporting it, that's obviously a big positive. But from my point of view, Article 7 is a negative. It is a downside from my point of view. And I have seen there have been some protests, but I think it's probably a nuanced perspective, and I'd love to hear what you think about some of that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with that. So if we get to the protests first, there are protests and they are sort of branded as no all Bitcoin protests. So, no Bitcoin, anti Bitcoin protests. But I'd say that's more of a flag of that the opponents of Bukele are now sort of rallying under. It is the reason is that, okay, so first of all, Bukele is very popular in the country, but he still has opposition, of course, and he has been taking some pretty controversial measures recently as well. Like he replaced part of the high court, high court judges, Supreme Court judges, I guess. Recently, he's also been firing a lot of regular judges. He's definitely consolidating power in that sense. So there's definitely opposition against him for these kinds of reasons, also just for policy reasons. People that think that he's not spending enough on this or that, or too much on this or that, or just opposition issues, and it's focusing a lot of Bitcoin. Now, if you get to the concerns about Bitcoin itself, it's also pretty varied. So some concerns are, I would consider FUD essentially. Um, uh, yeah, that Bitcoin is only used, or that it will be used for money laundering. I would argue the same is true for cash, and Bitcoin is actually being regulated the same as in most other countries. So the concern, if there is a concern about that at all, then it should be equal for Germany or Canada, or I'm just naming random countries. But it's not like it's more open in that sense here. Um, but yeah, money laundering, it's good for criminals. These kinds of issues. I've heard someone mention that Bitcoin was not for poor people because they can't afford to buy a Bitcoin. Apparently, not realizing that you can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. So there's definitely a lot of misinformation about Bitcoin at these protests. But like you mentioned, there are also some concerns that I would consider valid. One valid concern is, well, you already mentioned Article 7, so the mandated part of the law. Now, there are outs in the law. You don't have to accept Bitcoin if you obviously cannot, technically. However, when are you obviously not able to do it? That's very ill-defined. That's not specified in the law. So that opens the door for, what's the term? Um, let's just say, abuse of the law. And
Like an
there,
abuse of power, or yeah.
yeah, and abuse of power. I've heard examples where in El Salvador some restaurants were closed during the pandemic for not keeping to the COVID rules, while other restaurants were kept open, and it turned out that these restaurants that were closed also had issues with Bukele. So there's a very nice English word that's slipping my mind for that
Oh,
kind of
I think I know it's like selective enforcement. That's
selective enforcement. Yeah,
that
exactly.
might
So
be what.
so
Yeah.
even if there are outs in Article 7, it also opens the door for selective enforcement potentially. So that's a legitimate concern, I would say. There's also one of the concerns is that there's very little transparency about anything the government is doing really in this regard, which I would also consider legitimate. Like, how are the funds spent? Or if we want to get more into like a Bitcoin topic with the free and open source culture, then no one knows how this wallet actually works. The Chivo wallet that the government rolled out. It's a custodial wallet, but who's holding the funds? That's not even clear. Or so there's a lot of lack of transparency, and the government is not really answering these questions. So I would say it's balanced and nuanced in multiple ways. First of all, the protests aren't really only about Bitcoin, and the parts that are about Bitcoin are also a mix of just misinformation and some legitimate concerns. So that's what you're seeing. But if my impression is that generally it's more anti-Bukele than anti-Bitcoin. The protest that
Yeah, I see.
from what I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah,
But
and I think there
Bitcoin is
was
a part
also
of it.
an image. Yeah, right. And as I understand, part of that protest, or one of the protests, I saw an image of a Bitcoin ATM being burned or something like that, right? So,
That's
do you know
obviously
anything about
very
that?
that's obviously a very iconic image to that the media will take, and that's easy to spread on social media, and that's because it's visual, and that's something that people will immediately understand, that people are angry about Bitcoin or about the Chivo, because the ATMs are also branded as Chivo. um, so yeah, that happened. I think it was 2 days ago. But that's another good example that was actually the day that the El Salvador celebrated 200 years of independence, and that was also a reason for the opposition to sort of rally protests. So again, I don't think these protests was really about Bitcoin, although it may have been a part of it. But burning down a Chivo ATM makes for a very iconic image that everyone will see. So
Of course, yeah. And I saw some of the commentary from Alex Gladstein, who obviously of the HRF, Human Rights Foundation, and also a writer for Bitcoin Magazine. He was commenting that some of that tension was potentially because of the bad experience with dollarization about 20 years ago. So, do you have any commentary on that, or do you agree, disagree?
I have heard that, and I obviously read Gladstein's article, and he also had a tweet thread about it earlier. And I did hear people share that concern. I was on a radio show here actually a couple of weeks ago talking about Bitcoin, and then that was also one of the things that people brought up. And what Alex explained in that article is that, um, if I'm getting the numbers correct, then $1 was worth 8.75 colon. The colon was the currency before the dollar. But when the prices were changed, when people started pricing things in dollars, they just did a divided by 10 kind of thing. And therefore, it was as if a lot of things became 10 times more expensive overnight. We actually had something similar happen in the Netherlands. I'm from the Netherlands, as you know. When we changed from the guilder to the euro, we also had that similar issue where, just because of the exchange rates between the guilder and the euro, it made sense to just round things up a little bit. But because of that, a lot of things became 10% more expensive overnight. And this, Alex explained, especially affected the, the poorer part of the population, the people that would get their stuff from mom and pop stores, that would in fact round their amounts up a little bit. And part of it is also that back when the dollarization happened, there was also a very strong narrative pushed by the government back then that it would be an optional thing, that the dollar would just be an extra option. So the colon would still exist and circulate, but the dollar will become an extra option. What happened in reality is that the dollar very quickly just overtook everything. I think within a year or maybe two or something like that, there were basically no colones anymore. So a lot of people that were, whose concerns were eased back then on the promise that it would be optional, kind of felt betrayed. And now we have this government saying that Bitcoin will be optional, so they have that sort of natural distrust for these kinds of promises. I do think that this time it actually is different, because this time the dollar is clearly still the unit of account, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. That's also what the government is uh, promising. Again, depends on your trust in the government, I guess, when it comes to promises from the government. But in the case of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is volatile, I think we can both agree on that. It actually does make a lot more sense to keep things priced in dollars. So if things are priced in dollars, then that concern shouldn't really matter. So you could maybe categorize that concern as another, sort of not really a valid concern. But it is a concern
Yeah,
people
yeah.
have, and that I've heard, and it. I don't know how big of a part it is. I haven't heard it much, but I did hear it here and there, that people have sort of bad memories from a dollarization chapter, and it might, inform some of their concerns now.
Yeah, understandable. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about your experiences as well, going around and actually buying things with Bitcoin, right? So I presume, you got a Lightning wallet and you were just going out there and you had a really big one where you went to Macca's, McDonald's, we call it Macca's in
Yes.
Australia, but McDonald's. And you, yeah, tell us a little bit about, I want to hear that experience.
I mean, the experience is very. This is not going to make for a good story, but yeah, no, it was September 7th, so that was Bitcoin Day, and I woke up. Okay, so let's take a step back. So I've been here for a while now. I've been here since early July, more or less. And while I was here, I was going around, speaking with people, including also financial institutions. Just a month before the law went into effect, me and a couple of other Bitcoiners, we visited like banks in the country, payment processors, these kinds of financial institutions. And in our discussions with them, it became clear to us that they had no idea what was going on. They didn't know what Bitcoin really was or how it worked. They didn't know what the Lightning Network was or how it related to Bitcoin. They didn't know if they were supposed to be mining. They didn't know if they should be using XRP, Ripple. They didn't even know where to start. They had no idea. And there was also no, or at least very little, information from the government coming out. Now, they were talking about the Chivo Wallet, but there was no Chivo Wallet, and there was no information on the Chivo Wallet apart from, maybe some slide decks or some, superficial stuff, but nothing in depth of how it worked or nothing like that. There was some regulation published like 1 week before the law about how financial institutions should deal with Bitcoin, and that was mostly the just sort of the standard KYC AML type of stuff that was, I think, quite literally copied from other countries. But overall, it was just there was basically nothing, and people didn't know anything about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was not accepted anywhere outside of El Zonte, basically. Some other restaurants maybe here and there if you went to look for them, but nothing on any serious scale at all. And I was discussing this with Alex Gladstein actually, literally, I think it was literally the evening before the Bitcoin law went into effect. We were sort of discussing our experiences in the country. And I think I literally said, as an example, there's no way McDonald's is going to accept Bitcoin tomorrow. And he completely agreed with that. There's no way something like McDonald's is going to accept Bitcoin. So yeah, the next day I woke up and I went to get breakfast. There's actually a McDonald's right across the street here where I'm staying, and they have pretty decent breakfast actually here. It's like the typical Salvadoran breakfast. It's not the stupid McMuffins or whatever. It's actually half decent, and it's close. So I walked in, and because I'm a journalist, basically, because it's my job to do so, I asked, "Can I pay with Bitcoin?" Just so they could say no, and then I had learned that my assumptions were correct. But to my stupid surprise, they actually printed out this little receipt thingy. It had a QR code on it. It's a little bit of a puzzle because it wasn't a Lightning invoice or a Bitcoin thing, so I had to. But it was a URL to a website, and there wasn't a Lightning invoice there. So, to my surprise, I could actually pay with Bitcoin, which was kind of funny. So I tweeted it out with a spelling error, obviously, and that became my most viral tweet ever. So now I'm the McDonald's guy, retweeted by Edward Snowden and the president of the country and tens of thousands of other people. So
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. And so, I mean, do you know whether that was using the Chivo wallet on some kind of web interface, or was that like a McDonald's thing that they had coded up?
yeah, they were not using Chivo; they were using OpenNode. I doubt anyone at
Oh,
McDonald's
excellent.
actually
Okay.
coded something up, but surely they got some sort of partnership and they made it happen. Yeah, it were especially still now, I guess, but it's especially sort of these big chains, these multi-billion dollar chains that have started accepting Bitcoin here. I guess they have the time and money to actually do it. So you can go to McDonald's or Pizza Hut or Starbucks or these kinds of places, and they'll accept Bitcoin. It's not really, from what I've seen, it's not. A regular restaurant, just that's operated by one guy or one family, they are in general not really accepting Bitcoin yet, from what I've seen. But there is a trickle going on. I do see there are new additions and there are new places where I can start to accept it. But so far, from what I've seen, it's mostly like the big chains and sort of working the way down to smaller chains are now also starting.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And
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 so,
I have
obviously,
met
yeah.
I have been at a couple of places that do use the Chivo wallets as well now. So it started out with McDonald's, which did not, and also the Pizza Hut, which I mentioned, in Starbucks. They're using IBAX. But now there are actually some supermarkets, like some national, well, yeah, supermarkets that will exist across the country that start to use the Chivo wallet. I think maybe also Subway but I've seen the Chivo wallet a couple of times as well now, which does not use Lightning, by the way, or maybe the merchant that's helping me doesn't know how to switch or something like that. But it seems like that's only on chain for now.
Right. So it's yeah, I've heard different opinions and I've seen different points of view here, because some people have said they can use Lightning on it, or maybe there was some initial teething issues, so maybe they disabled the Lightning and they're going to re-enable it later. I'm not quite clear there.
I
Have
mean,
you,
when it
yeah,
comes to the
seen?
Chivo wallet itself, so what I just described were basically the merchant solutions. I think it's all in the same app. When you start the app, you can pick if you're a user or a merchant or maybe something else. Um, to be clear, I don't have the app because I'm not Salvadoran, so I can't use it. You need to use your Salvadoran ID thing to get it started. But
Yeah.
I have been playing around with other people's apps a little bit. So the merchant solution, every time that I came across one, it worked. Although it also only works on chain. The regular app for users is basically a giant mess. It's working some of the time. So on day one, a lot of people couldn't download it, even though a lot of people also could download it. I think it was downloaded 500,000 times or something, which is of course a lot. But from every time I tried it, it was either incredibly slow or some weird bug didn't let us scan a QR code, or it just crashed altogether, or it wouldn't even start up, or I think we lost money. I think because we were just playing around with it, sending $20 in Bitcoin to the thing, see if we could get it out of the ATM. No one knows where that $20 went anymore. So there are lots of issues. They clearly wanted to ship it on September 7th, no matter what, because it's just unfinished software. It did work a couple of times. There were, and I've heard other people that have used it successfully. So it's hit and miss, but in general, it's just clearly unfinished software.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But as I understand, the Bitcoin law does not mandate that they use the Chivo wallet. They can use any Lightning wallet, but as I understand, in practice, probably a lot of the businesses want to receive in US dollars, and so that's why they are trying to provide the Chivo wallet as a government option for them to be able to receive Bitcoin, but actually the merchant receives US dollars. But in fairness, you could do the same with OpenNode too. So
Yeah, I don't know how the open node infrastructure works exactly. I assume there's probably a conversion fee involved somehow, somewhere. That's not the case with Chivo. So with Chivo, if you are a merchant and you accept $5 in Bitcoin, you actually literally get $5 worth of dollars. So the conversion there is essentially subsidized by the government, which is another issue, by the way, which I haven't mentioned. That some people, also libertarians, might, if if they're consistent in their ideology, would have to oppose that because now the government is subsidizing that. But and that's also something that people don't like. There's this fund that the government has set apart that will buy up these Bitcoin. Now they can of course sell these Bitcoin, but still, the government is subsidizing the friction there. But that is, to your point, that is a important reason for people to use the Chivo wallets, because then they don't have to pay any conversion fee. They just get literally in dollars what they were paid. So it's a strong incentive to use Chivo instead of other solutions, even though other solutions
yeah.
clearly work better most of the time, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess let's summarize it this way then. So if that merchant or user is happy to just stay Bitcoin native, they can just use the well-known Lightning wallets and just fully everything will just work as it normally would on the Lightning network. But where they want the specific US dollar aspect, that's where they tend to be using Chivo or some other
Yeah,
solution.
not to
And
mention,
yeah,
that if you use an actual Lightning wallet or a Bitcoin wallet, you control your own keys, which is obviously another
of course.
benefit. The one thing I didn't mention, the other incentive for the Chivo, which I'm sure you know, but I haven't mentioned it yet, is the free $30 of Bitcoin. So everyone that opens up a Chivo wallet gets $30 of Bitcoin, which sounds nice and is nice. I guess the two concerns with that is, one, again, it's government subsidized, so you can have an opinion on that. The other thing is that they had this scheme where the first $30 in the Chivo app could only be spent to other Chivo apps. So one hop
Hmm.
can only be on two other Chivo apps. Now, once you've done one hop, it's free. Now you can spend it to any Bitcoin wallet, or you can cash it out in an ATM or whatever. But the first hop is only Chivo to Chivo. So the idea there is obviously to incentivize people to actually use Bitcoin, to actually try it out, rather than run to the closest ATM, get $30 out, and never look at it again. So that's the incentive.
You're right.
But what really happened, or at least one of the things that happened, is that a lot of people would take their $30 and would go to McDonald's or to Pizza Hut, or they wanted to buy something on Bitrefill, and they learned that they couldn't. And they didn't understand why they couldn't, and the McDonald's didn't understand why they couldn't. So now everyone has a bad experience, and they think Bitcoin doesn't work because they don't get that the $30 can only be spent to another Chivo wallet. So
Right.
a lot of people that had their first experience with Bitcoin now had a bad experience due to that restriction, which, I think it's very unfortunate that they put that. I get the I get the motivation for the restriction, but it's very anti-Bitcoin, first of all, and it's just giving people a bad experience, and it's unfortunate that their first Bitcoin experience is one where it doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. So I guess we're really going through the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Like that there are a lot of teething issues, let's say. And in fairness, I think it was always going to be this way because we're talking about 6.5 million people who many of have not been exposed to Bitcoin, and of course they're not necessarily on Bitcoin Twitter like the rest of us, who are like hardcore Bitcoin people. I can understand where there would be some of that teething issue, but hopefully, as the months progress, things get better and the experience is nicer and slick and easy and a bit better for people, so that it's not
Yeah,
such
no,
a jarring experience not being able to spend your sats, right?
yeah. Well, you mentioned we've been through the good, the bad, and the ugly. I guess I've mostly been through the bad and the ugly so far. Maybe that's my journalist mindset, where I focus on the things that are negative. To be clear, in general, I think it's absolutely great that a country, or at least I think a country like El Salvador, could benefit a lot from Bitcoin. It's just unfortunate that some of these bad aspects are there, because now that is becoming a focal point also within the country, like the protests we've mentioned, and they actually have a good point. Like if these bad aspects weren't there, if the $30 was freely spendable, if it wasn't mandated, like if these things were cut out the law, then it would just be great, and I'd be a very happy guy here. But I am a happy guy, but now there's so much
Yeah,
negative to focus on, which was so easily to avoid, and that's unfortunate. But
yeah. But I
it's
think
it's the
it
first
was always going to be
country.
this way.
It's the first country that tries something like this. So obviously there are going to be lessons to be learned, and obviously there are going to be kinks in the cable that are going to have to be worked out. So I actually don't want to sound too negative. I'm sounding too negative probably. In general, I think it's a great
Well,
opportunity for everyone here.
of course, and
And
so I
I've
can
had and
imagine
I've
I've
had
got
great
yeah,
experiences as well. So let's mention some of the great
yeah.
experiences then. So one of the cool things was that someone on Twitter, what was his name again? I forgot his name. Sorry if you're listening. Am I really not gonna remember his name? No, sorry. So that guy, he made a suggestion on Twitter where he said, "Hey, is it
Oh, Matt
possible?"
Alborg.
No, yeah, no, it was sorry, Matt Alberg. So it wasn't
Yeah,
actually Matt Alberg. It was someone that changed his name to. I know. Thank you, Matt Alberg. That's now we got it.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
although I think it was maybe someone from Cash App or Strike or someone else who actually made the original suggestion, Bitrefill. I don't remember. Someone made the suggestion that, hey, could you go to an ATM there, actually take a photo of the QR code, send that to us, and then see if you get the money out. So I did, and the videos on Twitter. It's like a 4-minute video from start to finish where you see how I indeed withdraw cash from a Bitcoin ATM here, sent by someone across the world who also shared a screenshot that clarified that he paid like $20 and maybe 30 cents, and I got $20 out, which is obviously, that changes the game of remittances completely. You couldn't do that before. If you wanted to do $20 in remittances, you're going to pay half of it in fees. That's just completely
Mm.
unfeasible. Better yet, the next day I went back to my favorite restaurant, McDonald's, and that time I took a photo of the QR code of my payment for a Big Mac. I posted that on Twitter, and someone across the world paid a Big Mac for me with like basically no fees over Lightning, and I was eating Big Mac. That these kinds of things were not possible 2 weeks ago, and they're possible now, and it's really cool, and it could be a real solution for people here because remittances is really expensive. So these are definitely some success stories, and there is a lot of potential there.
Yeah, and I mean, I have listeners all over the world, so there might be listeners out there who are thinking, "Yeah, like I want to come and spend some Sats, and I want to actually support the idea of trying to have a Bitcoin economy." And so there might be Bitcoiners all around the world who are listening, and they just want to get a perspective from you. What's it like on the ground? And hey, maybe I'll come and visit. I will be coming to visit because there's Adopting Bitcoin conference on in November, so I'm looking forward to coming down and using my Lightning wallet and all of those things. So I think that'll be a really fun experience just to sort of live in the future, right? And I think some of us, obviously in the Bitcoin world, we've been living in the future in some ways, right? Like there was the Lightning conference in 2019, and that really felt like living in the future. Like you would walk around the conference and you'd be able to pay with Lightning for ice cream or for things, or at the various Bitcoin, magazine or BTC media conferences there's a big strong focus on Lightning. Even in Bitcoin 2019, there was that there, and even the recent Bitcoin 2021. So I think those are some cool experiences for Bitcoiners out there. And I know President Bukele has also mentioned this idea of a Bitcoin permanent residence. So I believe it's 3 Bitcoins, and you either purchase property or put that into a business, and that will entitle you to residence rights in El Salvador. So that could also be a really interesting aspect. And I know also there will be no tax on the gain there. So that's also very potentially interesting. So I guess for anyone out there who's listening and maybe they're thinking about going to El Salvador, some of them might have the concern around like vaccine passports and things like that. What's been the experience there, and what's the kind of rule there in El Salvador?
El Salvador is not a libertarian haven when it comes to COVID. they well, first of all, there's still the mask mandate, although I think it's only indoors. If it's also outdoors, then I've been breaking the law, but not been fined for it. I think it's only indoors, as far as I can tell. Um, Bukele has actually, from what I understand, been pretty strict when it comes to lockdowns and these kinds of things. In fact, I believe, but someone feel free to fact check me on this. I believe that one of his lockdown laws was considered unconstitutional, and that's why he fired the all these judges from the Supreme Court and got new judges in, basically to get his way. To get into the country, I think you need either. When I got in, I needed either proof of vaccination or negative test. I think that's probably still the case. But if you go to like El Zonte, for example, so what the mask mandate, for example, which I just mentioned, that's mostly San Salvador, because in El Zonte I have not seen a single mask wear, worn by anyone. So there's
Right.
definitely a difference between different parts of the country. One other thing I want to mention, because this is something that comes up a lot, is security and safety. A lot of people are concerned about coming to El Salvador because they've heard bad stories about, the gang violence and the high murder rate. Um, I've been here for 2.5 months now. I've not felt unsafe. I've mostly been in San Salvador, and to be fair, I've mostly been in the richer areas of San Salvador. Uh, or I was in one of the coastal towns, like the surf towns, the touristy places. And here I felt completely fine everywhere. You probably don't want to go to bad neighborhoods at night, maybe, but there are Ubers and you can just Uber anywhere. So why would you walk in bad neighborhoods at night? There's no reason to do that. Or maybe like parts of the country that are more controlled by the gangs. But, again, don't go there if you're concerned about that. I think if you sort of stay in San Salvador in the coastal places, then I don't think you need to be concerned. I have not been concerned. I've not heard any bad stories. So I think in that sense, people that want to go to the conference, I personally think that's totally fine.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I'm hopeful that we see it might be a nice experience for people to go, and that maybe that helps the overall, if you will, this experiment, if we're gonna call it that, or this kind of move forward. That if the country supports Bitcoin and more Bitcoiners around the world want to come there and either as a tourist or potentially as an investor or potentially even as a resident, there are different ways that they might want to consider
I
that.
mean, that's even
Um,
one of the
yeah.
arguments that Bukele gave for the Bitcoin laws that would attract Bitcoin tourists. So if you don't want to let him down, then definitely come down and spend your sats here. Yeah, the other thing you mentioned is the free Bitcoin investments. That's indeed something he promised. I don't think there are any details about that yet. That's also sort of a common thread where there are a lot of promises or a lot of things that put out, but then the details aren't really there. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But that is something. Same. The other example would be volcano mining, for example, which everyone is sporting in their avatar. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I don't know if that's actually going to be feasible or cost efficient. And I have not been able to discover any details about that or any concrete plans. But, maybe it's like the Chivo wallet where one day it's just there and then it works half. Or maybe this time it will
Yeah,
work
yeah.
great. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I think it's maybe there's all these ideas out there, and maybe not all of them are going to work. And I think that's the other thing as well. Sometimes, and you've probably got a similar experience as well, I've seen over the years, Bitcoin just as a movement and as a technology, sometimes it goes in like a two steps forward, one step back dance. And so there are times where we sort of overextend and then we kind of come back down to reality and then again, and then wait a few more years and then boom, it comes again. So I think for people who are expecting that, El Salvador is going to hyper Bitcoinize all of a sudden and everyone's going to, no, I think it's going to be more like a gradual and slow thing that over time people slowly get accustomed to using Bitcoin. And look, just like all of us had to deal with Bitcoin's volatility, Salvadorans are going to have to learn that lesson that we all learned, right? Because you can only learn these things once you go through that big drop. And who knows, right? Whatever, if there's a big bull run later this year and a big crash, well, Salvadorans and people who are holding some Bitcoin are going to have to learn to deal with that aspect of it. So that's part of the Bitcoiner's journey, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean, I
yeah,
think
go on.
Bitcoin is, or money in general, is very much an emergent property. I'm very much a Hayekian in that sense. I think that's how money works, in the same way that language works. People speak language because they want to, not because it's mandated. In fact, if you mandate the language, then people might get angry. We've seen that in Catalonia, for example, the
Yeah,
region in Spain where they wanted to mandate Spanish and people took the streets. Language, money, these kinds of things, they're emergent properties. And I think the most the governments can do is create a equal playing field so they're creating an equal playing field for the dollar and the Bitcoin, which is good, I think. Ideally, they'd get rid of all legal tender laws, but that's another story. Uh, so they can do that, and they can sort of offer, fair regulation and or no regulation again, ideally. But let's just say fair regulation for now, and then it's really up to the people to adopt it or not, and it's up to people to discover if Bitcoin, is really going to benefit them or not. And I personally suspect that it will grow, same as other countries, of course. But now that El Salvador is creating this environment, it's a
yeah,
fertile environment, and I think that that could really
yeah,
benefit Salvadorans. But it's definitely not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to be years before it grows. And like you said, two steps forward, one step back. Yeah.
yeah. And actually, even on that same theme of being a Hayekian, I think Hayek also did write and speak about this idea of, to the extent that governments exist, that they shouldn't be thinking of themselves like a top-down architect. They should see themselves more like a gardener, right? You're sort of tilling and you're making a good environment for the people to go. And I think that's kind of aligned with what you were just saying there, that it should be, to the extent that you think government should exist or not. I mean, obviously I'm a libertarian, but to the extent that it should exist, it should be trying to minimize that, trying to set up a good environment for people who can then go build the products and build the services and all of those things.
Yeah, so yeah,
Another
exactly.
big
So
topic, yeah,
that's a
go on.
good thing about this law. That's what I really like about this law, that it is doing that. And then we don't have to get into that again. But what sort of contradicts that is that mandatory part of it. Like, that shouldn't be part of it if you just want to provide a fertile environment. But that they are creating a fertile environment is absolutely great.
Exactly. Yeah. And one other big topic we've got to get into, and you touched on this earlier, is the whole remittance thing. Right now, let me set the stage a little bit. There has been very conflicting and different views, right? So if you talk to, say, someone like Jack Mallers of Strike, or if you talk to, uh, most of us who are Bitcoin bullish, will be like, yeah, it's free remittance now, and it's cheap and it's fast. But if you talk to, let's say, Steve Hanke, right, someone who's meant to be a free market economist, but he will be out here saying, no, they should be doing a currency board, and look how cheap Western Union is, and he'll put it like, oh, see, the current, because you're having to convert back and forth to the US dollar each time you're paying a conversion fee, and that's why you shouldn't use Bitcoin. So I guess what's the reality, or what's the real nuance on the ground there, in terms of using Bitcoin for remittance?
I mean, the obvious thing first. The obvious thing is that if you don't convert from dollars and back into dollars, then clearly Bitcoin is superior for remittance because it costs the fraction of a cent. It costs, a lightning fee at this point to send money from anywhere in the world to El Salvador. Maybe that will increase over time. Scaling is still an issue even with lightning. But at the very least, we can objectively say that at this point, if you use lightning, and people just spend the Bitcoin here, then remittance isn't even a term that should be used anymore. Same as long distance calls. It's just we get on Skype or whatever. It's a thing of the past. So would remittance fees be? Now, if you get into his point that if you want to convert from dollars to Bitcoin and then back to dollars, I think it gets a lot more complicated and nuanced. So one of the things he argued, eh, what he took as an example was basically the pre-Bitcoin law remittance fees. So he would assume, I don't know what his exact, I don't know what his assumption were for buying Bitcoin. Maybe he took the most expensive example there, Coinbase or whatever the most expensive example is, and then send the money here. And then he probably assumed the highest possible transaction fee on chain or something. And then he went here, and then the highest fee if you go to an ATM. which were indeed, could be pretty steep. They could charge 5% or maybe even more at some of the ATMs, a month ago. Now that has changed now with the Bitcoin law, because now you can exchange your Bitcoin here into dollars for free, which I did. So I know for a fact that that's possible. There's no denying that. The more nuance, or if you want to get more into it, then the question is, okay, and we mentioned this, what's really happening is the government is subsidizing that. It's free because the government is subsidizing the friction. So then the question is, all right, how much is the government actually paying for that? Are they paying less than the ATMs were before? Maybe because they got better routes, or they get bulk discounts, or I don't know how that works exactly. That's a much harder question to answer. Like, is the taxpayer just paying these costs now? And would it, in fact, indeed still be cheaper overall if people used Western Union? I don't have the answer to that, and the reason I don't have the answer to that is in part because the government, again, is not giving any transparency when it comes to these kinds of things. They're
Hmm.
not. They
Yeah.
didn't put out a research report where they detailed what it was costing them exactly to do this, or what it was costing them before to get dollar bills in the country, and how that compared, and what the math is, and why this is cheaper. They didn't put that out. So we don't. I don't know. I don't think Steve Hanken knows. He's making a set of assumptions, and um, these assumptions may or may not hold up. I will say that I think, and this is, for example, also Jack Mallers' argument, that for especially for lower amounts, Bitcoin is actually, and Lightning is actually a much better solution, because there's this base fee for remittance. So whatever the amount is, you have to pay $8 or whatever it is. So if you're transmitting $10,000, then maybe these $8, don't really make much of a difference. But if you're transmitting 30, then all of a sudden these $8 make a big difference. And with Lightning, you don't have that starting fee. So, and the 5% is still the 5% on the other end. So for small remittances, it might actually be better to use Bitcoin. Now, as you hear, I'm kind of speculating and thinking out loud, because I do think that's all we can do at this point. We don't have the exact numbers. So, well, the government is subsidizing it, so as long as they're doing that, then it's obviously cheaper. Other than that, even if the government wouldn't subsidize it, which I might prefer, just ideologically speaking, then it would be another option.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't matter what anyone writes in their paper for Johns Hopkins University or whatever. People can just have the choice and pick whatever the cheapest option is. Right now, I think it's hard
Yeah.
to say what is actually going on beyond the screens, and therefore what is actually cheaper, or in which cases it makes sense, in which case it does not.
Mm.
I do think Steve Hanke gave a very one-sided um, example.
Answer, and that's probably not really accurate. Of, I mean, and look, I guess setting aside the ideological objection to government subsidizing things, it is. I mean, we wouldn't say, oh, I mean, the governments make the roads, right? We wouldn't like it is, I guess, quote unquote, free to use the roads, and the people can, civilians can use roads, right? So in the same way, we would say, well, civilians of El Salvador can, use Bitcoin, and yes, it's government subsidized, but at least it's free to them,
Yes,
at
no,
least
that's
in
that's
that
a very good
narrow
point.
sense.
That no, I agree. That's a very good point. That the government subsidizes a lot of infrastructure, and if you consider this financial infrastructure, then it makes sense for the government maybe to subsidize it. However, then the question remains: why do they subsidize this, and why don't they subsidize Western Union remittances, for example? There's still like a choice of what the government is doing, and maybe, and this is me very much speculating, I think that maybe the reason they're subsidizing Bitcoin in particular is because they recognize that being a dollarized country and being dependent on the United States and the US dollar and the Federal Reserve policy is really harming the country. And they recognize that, and that's why they figured, okay, we're going to subsidize and we're going to help bootstrap Bitcoin here, because that would actually be a way out. That's a much bigger issue. And interestingly, while that's definitely something that people will discuss on your podcast, and that people will discuss, that your listeners will know about, that piece of the argument, that part of the argument, has not been focalized here at all. Basically, it's not part of the pro. It's like no one. Well, I don't want to over. I don't want to say no one, but it's as big of a argument and as big of a topic that is on Bitcoin Twitter, here no one speaks about it, including the government. There was even this part of the initial draft of the government that Jack Mallers read on stage at Bitcoin 2021, where he where it specified that Federal Reserve policy was harming El Salvador or something like that. That was removed from the law. So is that because they don't want to ruffle feathers? Maybe. I don't know. Is that because they changed their mind on that? Also possible. I don't know. But it is definitely notable that that argument has been almost completely absent here, even though to me it sounds like that is actually the biggest argument in favor of offering an alternative to the dollar.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And I guess we could also argue that by supporting a Bitcoin network, maybe arguably they're sort of less choosing winners, right? Whereas if they were to subsidize Western Union, they're kind of picking a winner and just giving money to this company. Whereas if they sort of say, hey, here's the Bitcoin and Lightning network, you're allowed to use whatever wallet you want, but here's the government one if you, for whatever reason, can't choose or cannot use a private market solution, maybe there's a little bit of an argument on that aspect. But I think the broader point as well that I think the Steve Hankes of the world and others like that ignore is the convenience factor as well. Because as people would point out, even people down in Bitcoin Beach and El Zonte would point out that, let's say, grandma or mum back home has to go and ride the bus for a few hours to go get that money out. Whereas if they use a Bitcoin wallet, they've just got it right there on their phone straight away. And although we don't really like the coercion aspect of Article 7, they can now directly spend the Bitcoin. And that's an important part, right? Because without that ability to directly spend Bitcoin, you can't close the loop.
Yes, but that, I agree, but that does come back to sort of the original argument that if people actually use Bitcoin, then remittance isn't even an issue anymore. Then that word doesn't even make sense anymore. If people do want to get dollars, which was sort of the base assumption for Steve Hanke's paper, then they, in that case, still need to go to a ATM and get the dollars out. So that might still require a bus ride, and that might still be a place where the gangs sort of hang out to see who's getting a lot of money. So in that sense, I would say it's probably equal. You can, of course, keep the dollars in your app as well. You can keep a dollar balance in your app. So maybe you could counter the argument in that way that people don't actually have to get the cash anymore. They can just pay each other in dollars through the Chivo app if the Chivo app works. So maybe if you want to make that argument, then it holds up. Yeah. But if you want cash,
Yeah,
then the
interesting.
problem is
But I
still
guess,
similar, I would
yeah.
say.
Right. And actually, I'm also curious your thoughts on this also, and just your experience on the ground. What's been your experience with talking to Salvadorans and people on the ground in terms of how they manage how much USD they hold versus how much Bitcoin and Sats they hold? Is it sort of like people keep their tips in Bitcoin and they just hold a little bit of Bitcoin, and then for most of their day to day stuff, they're holding USD? Or what's kind of the sense you have just from discussions?
I mean, I don't think there's one strategy. Some people are happy to hold Bitcoin. I've met people that would accept Bitcoin on one day, but not on another because they thought Bitcoin was going down and that's the day they don't want to accept Bitcoin. But then if you were there a week before, they
Yeah.
did. So that will be a case. I mean, I've met Salvadorans that are basically trading, that are just trying to time the markets. So, they'll keep it in Bitcoin when they think it goes up, and they transfer to dollars when they think it's going to go down. I don't. It's not clear to me that they fully recognize that they're just currency trading, that they're trading Bitcoin, but that is what they're doing. Um, and definitely also just, especially now with this new, with since the law has gone into effect in these big chains, McDonald's and Pizza Hut and Starbucks and all those. I'm pretty sure that they just convert it into dollars immediately. Although, I mean, maybe McDonald's would surprise me again, but I'm assuming they're taking it in the dollars. But in general, to answer your question more generally, I do think volatility is clearly the number one problem. It's also one of the things is that one of the arguments, another argument that I haven't mentioned, is that there's this perception that Bitcoin is for the rich. Here, when you go to these protests, that's sort of one of the things you'll hear, that Bitcoin is for the rich. Um, one thing they might say is because not everyone has internet, or because not everyone has cell phones. I'm not sure I find that argument very convincing. But another argument they will give is that if you are rich, you can stomach the volatility. Well, if you're really living paycheck to paycheck and you need your food to eat, then you're not going to be able to take any volatility risk. And therefore, Bitcoin is better suited for the rich. Now, that is an argument that I think that actually holds up. That, yeah, it's true. If you have a lot of money, you can stomach the volatility better. So I do think volatility is definitely the number one challenge. If I have to mention one number one challenge for a country like El Salvador, it's the volatility of Bitcoin. When you
Yeah,
when you
yeah,
price it in day to day goods, which most people have to price their living expenses in. Yeah, one Bitcoin is one
yeah. I mean,
Bitcoin. It's true and sounds nice on social media, but it doesn't help them very much if they want to buy pupusas and the price
yeah,
dropped by
right. And
ten
as
percent.
if their expenses are, denominated in US dollars, whether that's rent or employees' wages or, you know, food products that your wholesale cost of what you're buying. And I can understand that aspect. And it might just be a matter of time there as well for people to get accustomed to the volatility. And then at some level, whether they consciously think about it or just kind of do it without really thinking, have a small portion of Bitcoin that they hold, some sats, and then maybe they keep their US dollar for their kind of day to day stuff. But over
Yeah,
time, that percentage will grow.
that's the positive side of things, of course, which I of course forgot to mention, as I tend to do apparently. But yeah, no, it is true that Bitcoin as savings technology. It's also savings technology for people here, and up till now they had no savings technology. They had no other option to save at all. So it does now offer this to people. So if they can set anything apart, then now they actually can set something apart, because now they have something to save in, and that is affecting. That's something that the people from El Zante mentioned, Bitcoin Beach, that I'll mention a lot, and also some of the people I've spoken to, that they actually do that. So they're now starting to get more into a savings mindset, and that's very interesting. So yeah, that's the positive side of things,
Yeah,
of
that's a really
volatility.
good way to put it. And I'll tell you what, it's like, here's the good counter argument then to the protesters in that example, because they would say, oh, it's only for the rich. But think about it this way: right now, if you can't access buying property or stocks, again, which is again accessible to the rich, you can't save. And so in this way, you can stack sats, you can stack a fraction of Bitcoin, a small amount, and it's actually accessible in that way. Of course, it'll take time for people to learn that and to understand that and to as we say, have a long term view. But I think the whole savings technology narrative, as our friend Pierre Rochard has famously popularized, is an important one. I think actually, and also an important idea as well for people out there who want to support El Salvadorans. As my friend Hass McCook says, if everyone's out here setting up their DCA stacking sats plan, because if the price of Bitcoin, if you become part of the quote unquote DCA army and you help the price stabilize or steadily be rising over time, then that will provide a better experience for anyone who's saving into Bitcoin. And so you're sort of helping deal with that volatility problem if you're joining the DCA army.
Yeah, to that point, or I'm not sure if it's exactly to that point, but you just mentioned. Yeah, so let's get back to the protesters again. I guess one of the arguments I've also heard is, El Salvador is already an impoverished country. What are you doing bringing Bitcoin here? So that suggests that they're really looking at Bitcoin as sort of a luxury product. While I think you and probably a lot of your listeners will think, part of the reason that the country is so impoverished, or at least it doesn't help that the country is dollarized and the dollar is being devalued by a different country. And now, in a pretty perverse way, El Salvador is sort of paying the bill for that. That's not helping making the country richer either. So, if you see, yeah, you and me will see Bitcoin as a
Yeah,
potential to actually get out of that cycle. But yeah,
exactly.
like I mentioned, that's one of the arguments that just hasn't been. I've not heard it or seen it basically anywhere, including from the government. It's it's not one of the arguments for Bitcoin that's being espoused here very much.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's how you
a
get
funny
into a
thing.
situation where people see it as a it's a bit of a luxury product and a mismatch for a poor country, because why would you introduce a luxury product into a poor country? Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the flip side of it is the opportunities that if there are businesses who can sell products and, wealthy Bitcoiners who want to come to El Salvador and spend their sats, that's opportunities, that's jobs for Salvadorans. So I guess that's the flip side to that particular piece there. I also know you were a part of the Bitcoin meetup in San Salvador. So can you tell us a little bit about that? How did that go down? What was the sentiment there?
That's kind of a funny story, actually. So I, it was probably about 8 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, somewhere around that time, that me and a couple of Bitcoiners, there are Bitcoiners just visiting the country every week now, because as at least for the past couple of months that was the case. And in one weekend, me and a couple of other Bitcoiners, we went to El Tunco, which is one of the beach towns. It's close to El Zonte, but it's more geared towards their parties there at night, and you can have a beer. El Zonte is pretty quiet at night, so we went there. And at one point, we were having breakfast with it was Moritz from Spectre, Nicholas from Galoy, and Fode from Senegal. He just got the grant from the Human Rights Foundation to set up a course there to help
Yeah,
Senegalese
nice.
work with Bitcoin. Anyways, Moritz sort of jokingly suggested to me, he said, Aaron, you know what you should do? You should organize a meetup. That way you don't have to find all the Bitcoiners in El Salvador. They'll come to you.
They'll come to you.
Yeah.
That's great.
That will make your job easier here. So we laughed for we laughed. It was sort of a joke, I guess, but then we sort of talked about it and we realized that was actually a very good idea, and we started putting together this meetup. So we put up a meetup page and picked a location. Bitcoin Magazine. I figured Bitcoin Magazine would actually want to sponsor it. So because we want to help the community and give back to the community in these kinds of ways and support a project like this in El Salvador. So Bitcoin Magazine came in to sponsor. And then the first time, I think we went to a steak restaurant. Of course, that's obviously the first place you go to for a meetup. And I think about 18 people showed up, something like that, and it was nice fun, and a bunch of Salvadoran people showed up, and a bunch of fellow travelers, and so we decided to do it again. And then the second time, Galoy sponsored, and that time we just went for beers, and 50 people showed up, so it was like a big growth on the second meetup. And then the third one we did on Bitcoin Day, and Bitrefill sponsored, and there were probably more than 100 people. We sort of uh, reserved one part of a bar, but the whole meetup spilled over to the whole bar, and it was amazing. It was really cool to see all these international Bitcoiners show up for this, but also a lot of locals that showed up, and yeah, it was a very nice end of the Bitcoin day with a party with Bitcoiners in the middle of the jungle.
That's
Not in the
fantastic.
middle of the
Yeah, I
jungle,
mean,
in
I'm
the
a big
middle of the
fan of
volcano
meetups.
area, I guess I should say.
I'm a big fan of Bitcoin meetups, and I always try to pop into them. Or back when I was in Sydney, I was an organizer for them. I think they're a great way to grow the scene and grow the knowledge and give education as well. So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, and
What's
they're so
been,
easy to start
yeah,
as well, which is nice. Like it doesn't take that much
yeah.
organization. Just pick a spot, pick a date, time, and people will show up, and you have good conversations and a nice beer or something else, steak.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So definitely, listeners, I encourage you get involved. Either start a meetup or go join the local one and help out in whatever way you can. And also, I'm curious on Bitcoin companies coming to El Salvador. I presume you've seen a lot of this. What's been what have you seen there?
Yeah, so there are a couple of companies that are, or a bunch of companies that are opening like a second or third office here, or hire a country manager. Bitrefill has a country manager. A Strike, also an office, both of them. Paxful has got some feet on the ground here. IBEX, which is from Guatemala, so it was already closed, but they're at least partly settling in El Salvador as well. Also, just I've met a lot of people from companies that aren't necessarily moving the company here, but a lot of interest from everywhere. Obviously, at Tina, which are uh, doing the ATMs. Although I don't think that has been officially announced or anything. But it's obvious that it's Athena that got the ATM deal. Speaking of which, it's still not clear who built the Chivo wallet. There are probably multiple companies involved there, but it gets back to the lack of transparency from the government. There's very little transparency about these kinds of things. But yeah, getting back to your point about companies, well, I'm almost certainly forgetting at least one, maybe several. But I mean, it's small. It's not like it's not like I've not met a company that's moving its HQ over here, but like a second
Of
office
course,
and
yeah.
and getting some people here to help with the rollout, or so it's creating jobs here as well, at least some jobs. So that's good for the local economy as well.
Yeah, that's cool. So I guess, and that's the other thing as well, because this is a global thing. There are developers all over the world who are working on some Bitcoin wallet or Lightning wallet somewhere that's helping in that way as well. So
I mean,
that
that's the
would be that's
benefits. That's the benefits of plugging into an open system like Bitcoin, right? That it's open source, and anyone who's helping Bitcoin is now helping El Salvador. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
yeah, exactly. Like as an example, Roy and the team at Breeze making their Breeze software in Israel, but anyone in El Salvador can just spin up a wallet and it's got an inbuilt merchant POS terminal, so you can just open Breeze, start the merchant terminal, and boom, you're receiving Sats. So all over the Lightning Network. So
And it will
that's just one
probably
example.
and it will probably work a lot better than the Chiva wallet as well. So there you go.
Well, there you go.
Sorry, I'm maybe
um,
dunking a bit too much on the Chiva wallet, but it is a piece of crap.
well, I'm sure it'll.
I'm sure they'll improve
People will
it.
figure it out.
I'm sure they're improving it. Maybe we shouldn't expect too much from them after 1 week. Uh, Go Team Bukele. Let's make the Chiva wallet
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Also, wanted to ask you actually about Bitcoin Core 22, version 22. So you wrote an article about this also. Um, what's your what's the high level, I guess, comment you'd have about Bitcoin Core version 22?
The high level comments. I mean, as you know, Bitcoin Core has a new release every 6 months. I think this one took a little bit longer actually, but it's scheduled to have a new release every 6 months. So that means after 6 months, there's a cutoff point, and then whatever is ready is in there, and whatever is not is a work in progress. So it's not like Bitcoin Core software is released, like some commercial software when they have a new feature ready, or it's not like that. It's just whatever is ready is ready. Now they did have some interesting things ready for this one. I think one of the most notable ones is hardware wallet support in the GUI. In the user interface is now basically complete. You still need the HWI hardware wallet integration add-on sort of software, but then you can just use it from the Bitcoin Core wallet. It was already available in the client. Sorry, am I saying that right? In the command line interface. Sorry. But
Yeah.
that was obviously not as accessible to regular users. So now it's available in the wallet. So you can link your Trezor or Ledger or OpenDime or whatever it is, and use the full security of Bitcoin Core. So that's cool. It's Taproot ready. Taproot, the protocol upgrade will go live in November, and Bitcoin Core 21.1 was already Taproot ready, of course, the minor release, but this is the first major release that's Taproot ready. There's also some minor Taproot support in it, but that's it's baby steps,
Like
like I
Taproot
mentioned.
addresses and things, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But you can't use like full Taproot functionality, like with all the smart contract stuff or anything like that. You can use Taproot for regular transactions essentially, and you can uh,
Yep.
label your Taproot addresses as such under the hood. These kinds of things. Um, Bitcoin Core is now compatible with I2P, which is it's like the Tor like. I2P is a little bit like Tor. I don't know the details. I don't know what the difference is exactly. From
Yeah.
what I understand, Tor is more centralized when it comes to network mapping, and I2P has a more decentralized solution for that. While it's also a little bit better for hidden services, a bit more geared towards hidden services. So if you never need to leave the privacy network, then it's a bit better for that. While Tor is more also suitable if you want to connect with the regular internet. Let's see what else. Yeah, there was.
I think the last big one was the test mempool accept.
Oh yeah, that's yeah. Well, again, that's another baby step. It's like a small step. So the bigger idea there, the bigger plan is that right now sometimes if your transaction gets stuck, so you're receiving a transaction, but it has a very low fee and therefore it's stuck in a mempool. You can actually speed it up by spending the coins from that transaction in a new transaction with a higher transaction fee. Sorry. And then what a miner will do is it won't just look at transactions individually to see which pay the highest fees, but it will actually look at combinations of transactions. So a miner will be able to figure out, you know what, if I confirm this low fee transaction, then I can also confirm this high fee transaction, and therefore that's more profitable than picking two other transactions. So that's a way for users to get their transactions unstuck. This is sometimes very important in context of something like the Lightning Network, where if sometimes you need to get a transaction confirmed within a certain time frame because otherwise your counterparty can claim the funds because
Can steal from you or things. Yeah.
yeah. So sometimes very important that you can use this functionality. Now, the problem is that what I just discussed is about which transactions are included in blocks. But before a transaction is included in a block, it must first be first be included in a mempool. So in the mempools of nodes for it to even make its way to miners for them to include it in a block. And for mempools, that logic that I just explained, child pays for parent, doesn't work. So now sometimes the transaction you're receiving might have such a low fee that it doesn't even make it in mempools, but then you also can't speed it up because the logic that the combination is considered doesn't apply yet. The long term plan is uh, that this will work for mempools as well, so that the child pays for parent logic will come to work for mempools, and so you can use it to get for the safety of the Lightning Network, for example. This is a multi-step progress to get there, and one of the steps that's been included in this Bitcoin Core release is that you can sort of test this on your own node. So you can create multiple
Yeah.
transactions, test it on your own node, see if your mempool would accept it, and that's sort of just running a test essentially. But over longer term, this should also be rolled out on the peer-to-peer network, for example, and then you can actually start sending packages of transactions. So these are then packages. So you're sending two packages as two transactions as one package, and then it will be considered as such. So one baby step on that direction. Now there are of course many more subtle changes and bug fixes, and Bitcoin Core just improves in all sorts of ways. But in my article, what you're referring to, I think unless I'm forgetting one, but I think I indeed picked these four as sort of the most notable ones. But
Those were
for
the big
more,
ones, I
you can
think.
just
And I
read
think, yeah.
the release notes, of course.
Of course, yeah, yeah, but I think that's a good one for listeners who maybe you're not as technical and you just want to get a high level, get a few ideas. What were the big changes that came in this recent major release of Bitcoin Core, which is the reference implementation of Bitcoin? And yeah, it's just there's all these little progress being made along the way, and it's interesting to see. Yeah, with with mempool accept and things, as I understand, one of the concerns, like hypothetically, it could be that you don't want to open it up that someone can like DOS the network or shut down someone's node by sending like malicious packages together. So it's kind of like, how do you intelligently do this and things like that. So that's all really interesting stuff to see.
Yeah, and of course
But yeah, I think yeah,
the one that's maybe most interesting or most important is actually Taproot. So anyone that hasn't
yeah,
upgraded to Bitcoin Core 21.1 yet, now is really the time to upgrade because the protocol upgrade will go live. and you're not using full node security if you're not enforcing taproot starting somewhere mid-November. So, if you haven't
Yep.
upgraded yet, now is a very good time. Just upgrade to Bitcoin Core 22 and you're good to go.
Yeah, that's a good call out there, Aaron. So yeah, listeners, make sure you check out if you've got a node package, see if most of them would have put up the update, or they will soon. And so you can update your package there, or you can, if you're running it manually, obviously you know how to do that, to go and get that updated and get up to speed. Because there's lots of things happening in the Bitcoin land, whether that's in El Salvador or whether it's Bitcoin Core or it's Lightning, and it's so incredible to see all these things happening. So yeah, I guess it's probably a good spot to finish up here. But
Yeah,
Aaron, before
or it's
we,
Bitcoin 2022. Can I shield that for
yeah,
for a second?
yeah, for sure,
There you
man.
go.
I'm
I've
I'm
I've
excited for
shielded
that.
it. April coming up, biggest
Yeah,
Bitcoin
Bitcoin
conference in the
22 coming
world.
up is April, right? Yeah, I'm looking forward to it,
Yep.
and it's going to be up in Miami, right? So
Yes.
I'm looking for. I was so upset that I missed 2021, but I'm you know gonna make sure I'm there for 2022,
21 was
and
amazing. It was
yeah, it
really
was huge.
overwhelmingly large,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's just a good chance to meet lots of fellow like-minded Bitcoiners, right? So, uh, and just to get a sense, and you can sort of meet a lot of the Bitcoin Twitter people who you've been following online, or you might have been interacting with them, and it's a good chance to get in touch and meet people that way. So I'm definitely
it's
I'm
like
looking
it's
forward
like
to that
Bitcoin
also.
Twitter comes to life.
Yeah, that's it.
I think someone else
Yeah, and
described it like that. I
I
don't
guess
remember
because
who.
yeah. So that's a good chance to meet people. And yeah, of course, go and check out bitcoinmagazine.com. And Aaron, where can people find you? And of course, where can people find your podcast as well?
Yeah, so people can find me on Twitter, obviously, Aaron Van W. The podcast is called Bitcoin Explained nowadays. It used to be called the Van Wirdum NATO. We rebranded it. Now it's Bitcoin Explained. Yeah, just Bitcoin Magazine. Oh, we're bringing out a new print publication. In a couple of weeks, there will be a print publication, which will also include my story on El Salvador. So check that out.
Fantastic.
And thank you
Well,
for having
Aaron,
me,
it's been a
Stefan.
pleasure. Yeah, it's been great chatting with you. Thanks, Aaron.